He wasn't supposed to survive, old, worn, left to freeze beside a ditch on the edge of nowhere. His ribs showed through patchy fur. His eyes held no fight, no hope, just the quiet ache of being forgotten. People passed, no one stopped, until she did. A small-town vet mourning her father, and a broken German shepherd no one else wanted. What happened next will stay with you, because some rescues go both ways. Before we begin, tell me, have you ever met an animal that healed you? Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear how love found you, and if you believe that even the oldest, weakest life still matters, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just a rescue story. This is about redemption. For all of us. The sky over Willow Creek was a heavy sheet of iron gray, the kind that seemed to press down on the rooftops and soak the earth with a quiet vengeance. It had been raining since early morning, a cold and steady drizzle that turned dirt roads into thick ribbons of mud. The pine trees that lined the outskirts of town leaned under the weight of the wet, and every now and then a gust of wind rattled the loose siding on the old barn next to the veterinary clinic. Claire Bennett stood by the frosted window of her father's former office, arms folded across her navy sweater, watching the rain blur the world outside. Claire was 32, with auburn hair tied back in a messy bun, her face pale but composed. Grief had softened the youth in her features, replacing it with something quieter, more resolved. She had her father's deep-set hazel eyes, the same tired crease near the brow that never fully disappeared. Since his passing 8 months ago, she'd taken over the clinic, a modest one-story building tucked off Old Hollow Road, determined to run it her way, even as bills piled up and investors circled like vultures. Most recently, a representative from Cascade Animal Group had offered to buy out the property, promising to modernize it, streamline costs, and relieve Claire of her burdens. She declined, firmly. The rain picked up, drumming louder on the tin roof, and just as Claire turned away to file a patient's record, a flicker of movement caught her eye through the window. She leaned in, squinting through the streaked glass. Something was out by the tree line. Something still, dark, and hunched. She grabbed her coat. Old Hollow Road was slick, the gravel mostly lost beneath puddles. Claire kept close to the edge as she stepped through the mist, her boots sinking slightly into the mud. As she neared the shape, her breath caught. It was a dog, not just any dog, a German shepherd, drenched and motionless, standing at an angle that suggested more surrender than defiance. Its ribs were visible beneath soaked, matted fur. The eyes that met hers were a dull, sunken amber. Not frightened, not aggressive, just done. "Hey there," Claire said softly, crouching about 10 feet away. The dog didn't move. Now closer, she could see the limp in his right hind leg, the rawness of the skin on his left flank. Every breath looked like it cost effort. Claire didn't reach out. Instead, she eased her backpack off and opened a small zippered pouch, retrieving a protein bar, meant for her, but at that moment she doubted he would be picky. She unwrapped it slowly and placed it on a dry patch of gravel, backing away. Minutes passed. Rain rolled down the shepherd's snout, dripping from his whiskers. Finally, he stepped forward, just one paw, then another. He limped toward the protein bar, sniffed, and with shaking jaws took a bite. Claire didn't smile. Not yet. But her heart cracked open the slightest bit. By the time she got him into her old Ford truck, wrapped in a clean towel and lying curled in the passenger seat, she had already named him Zephyr. The drive back to the clinic was quiet, except for the faint whine of the truck's heater and the occasional rustle as Zephyr shifted uncomfortably. Claire kept glancing over, taking in every inch of his body. He was old, that much was clear. Gray streaks on the muzzle, teeth worn down, gait uneven. But there was something else. A bearing. The way he didn't flinch at loud noises. The posture, even in weakness, still dignified. This wasn't just a stray. He had history. Back at the clinic, Claire wrapped Zephyr in blankets and laid him in a corner of the exam room. She dimmed the lights. Her assistant, a high school senior named Mallory, peeked in. Mallory was 17, with a bright ponytail and quiet eyes that missed little. She rarely spoke unless necessary and never asked about Claire's personal life, which was partly why Claire had kept her on. She stepped in now, holding a warm bowl of chicken broth. "Another stray?" Mallory asked, kneeling beside the old dog. Claire nodded. "Found him near the back fence. I think he was trying to get shelter under the shed." "Looks rough," Mallory murmured, placing the bowl down gently. Claire watched as Zephyr sniffed at the bowl but didn't drink. His breathing was shallow. His paws twitched in his sleep, as if running in some distant memory. "I'm not sure he'll make it through the night," Claire admitted, more to herself than to Mallory. Mallory didn't reply. She stayed there a moment longer, then stood. "If he does, he'll owe you his life." Claire didn't answer. She watched the rain through the window again, her reflection a ghost in the glass. Later that night, long after Mallory had gone and the world outside had turned dark and silent, Claire sat cross-legged beside Zephyr. She read aloud from a veterinary journal, more to fill the silence than to retain information. Zephyr didn't stir, but once, just once, he let out a sigh, long and tired, and shifted to press his side closer to her knee. Claire kept reading. The next morning dawned with a low-hanging fog that wrapped the streets of Willow Creek in a dull haze. The storm had passed, but the air still held its chill. Outside the clinic, puddles shimmered in gray light, reflecting the skeletal branches of winter trees. Inside, the world was quiet, too quiet. Claire moved about the examination room with the kind of care one gives to things that might break at any moment. Zephyr hadn't eaten. Not the soft chicken bits Claire had left in a porcelain dish by his bedding, nor the warm broth Mallory had carefully prepared again before leaving for school. The old shepherd remained curled near the corner, his eyes half-lidded, breath shallow but steady. He didn't look at Claire, nor did he flinch when she knelt beside him. He simply stared past her, past the room toward the door, as if expecting someone who never came. Claire sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She'd seen this look before. In animals that had lost not just trust, but the will to search for it again. Her fingers hovered above Zephyr's head, hesitated, then slowly retreated. Some wounds, she knew, didn't bleed. They just stayed silent. Later that afternoon, as she filed inventory reports in the back room, the front door chimed faintly. Claire walked out to find a small boy standing in the entrance holding something in his arms. He was around 10 with a thin build and a too large green hoodie that drooped over his hands. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the edges, damp from the fog. His eyes wide and solemn met hers with quiet purpose. "Hi," he said. "I brought this. For the dog." Claire blinked. "You mean Zephyr?" He nodded and stepped forward, extending the bundle, a folded hand-knit woolen blanket frayed at the corners and faded from use. "It used to be my dog's. His name was Rocket. He passed away last year. He got hit by a truck near the bridge." The boy's voice barely wavered. Claire softened. "That's very kind of you." The boy didn't move to leave. Can I just see him?" She paused, then nodded. "Follow me." They stepped into the main room. Zephyr hadn't moved. The boy crouched a few feet away, carefully unfolding the blanket and laying it beside the dog. For a moment he just sat there, arms resting on his knees, staring not at the dog's wounds, but into the heavy stillness that surrounded him. "I'm Eli," he whispered. "I know it still hurts. It does for me too." Claire watched from a distance. Eli didn't try to pet him, didn't reach out. He just stayed there, quiet and present. After several minutes, Zephyr's ear twitched. Then his tail gave the smallest, almost imperceptible shift. Claire didn't say anything. Sometimes grief understood grief. When Eli finally stood, Claire offered him a cup of cocoa. He sat on the wooden bench in the lobby, his legs swinging slightly above the floor as he sipped. "Is he going to die?" he asked without looking up. "I don't know," Claire answered honestly, "but he's warm now, and he's not alone." That night, as dusk bled into evening and Claire closed the front blinds, a sudden impulse made her walk to the old record player tucked beside her father's bookshelf. It had collected dust since he passed a relic she hadn't touched in nearly a year. She flipped through the vinyls and pulled out one with a worn cover, Will Jennings and the Hollow Strings, Home After Rain, her father's favorite. Claire placed the needle gently. A few soft crackles. Then the gentle twang of guitar strings broke the silence. She sat on the floor back against the wall, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. The song drifted like wind through the room, slow, steady, nostalgic. At first, Zephyr remained still, but then something changed. His breathing shifted. His ears lifted slightly. The soft pad of his front paw moved across the blanket. Slowly trembling with age and effort, he pushed himself upright. Then one stiff step, then another. Claire held her breath. Zephyr limped toward her, not with strength, but with something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or longing. When he reached her, he paused, looked into her eyes, and then without a sound he laid down, placing his bony frame gently against her leg. His head rested near her foot, eyes closed, breathing shallow but peaceful. Claire exhaled, slowly. The room smelled faintly of cedar and warmth. She reached down gently, brushing the damp fur along his shoulder. "So you remember," she said, voice breaking just a little. "You remember someone." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night she stayed on the floor with him until the song ended and long after the needle had returned to silence. By midweek the snow had returned, not a storm, but a quiet feather-like drift that settled over the town of Willow Creek like a worn blanket. Everything slowed in the snow, cars moved softer, voices grew quieter, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside the clinic, Claire moved in practiced silence, taking inventory and organizing files that hadn't been touched since her father's final weeks. Zephyr lay in the same corner he had claimed days before his body curled into the donated blanket, breathing steady, but shallow. He hadn't approached her again since that night, but he hadn't withdrawn either. There was a thread of something between them now, fragile like silk, but real. That morning she decided it was time for a more thorough exam. Claire approached slowly, kneeling beside Zephyr with a stethoscope draped around her neck and a small flashlight in hand. His ears twitched as she knelt, and his eyes met hers, alert but no longer afraid. She spoke softly, narrating every move, not because he needed it, but because it made the space feel safer. "Okay, old boy," she murmured. "Let's see what your bones are hiding." With careful hands, she ran her fingers over his spine, pressing gently around the joints. Every rib showed beneath the skin, but there was no fresh injury, only the unmistakable contour of starvation. When she lifted his front leg to examine his chest and abdomen, she paused. There, beneath the fur, just above his belly, were two faded scars. Long, symmetrical, like someone had fastened something tight around him for a very long time. Around his neck, hidden under the thicker mane of fur, were similar indentations so faint they could be missed by a less trained eye. But Claire saw them, and something in her chest tightened. "You were tied up," she whispered. For a long time. Zephyr didn't flinch, but his eyes turned away, settling on the window where the snowfall danced. Claire's breath caught. This wasn't just a case of abandonment. This was neglect, sustained, deliberate, and cruel. No wonder he hadn't moved when she found him. He hadn't been waiting to be rescued. He'd been waiting to be forgotten. That evening, while updating Zephyr's file at the front desk, the clinic's door opened with a hesitant chime. A woman stepped in, bundled in a wool coat and scarf, tapping snow off her cane as she moved. She was in her 70s, tall and lean, with hair the color of steel and eyes that had once been bright, but now flickered with a distant, thoughtful kind of light. Her name was Martha Ellis, a retired librarian who now lived at Willow Pines Elder Care Facility, just a few blocks north. Claire Bennett. She asked, her voice gravelly but kind. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" Martha glanced around the modest clinic, her gaze pausing on the closed door to the back room. "I heard you've taken in a German Shepherd. Old one. Rough shape." Claire nodded cautiously. "He's recovering. Slowly." Martha drew closer to the counter, adjusting her scarf. "I'm not here to claim him. Don't worry. But I think I've seen that dog before." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Where?" "About 2 winters ago," Martha said, her hands now resting on the counter. "My neighbor back then, Harold, used to work at the Sinclair gas station on Route 9. He had a dog just like that. Shepherd, dark coat, smart eyes. Only he kept him locked up behind the shop in a chain-link pen. Said he was training him for security, but I never saw that dog walk more than 5 steps. Just stood there day in and day out." Claire leaned in. "You're sure it's the same dog?" Martha gave a tired smile. "Let's just say, you don't forget a dog that stares at you through a fence like he's already gone." Claire said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the edge of Zephyr's file. "He disappeared after Harold got sick." Martha continued. "A few folks said he was taken in by the county. But I always wondered if maybe he just got out, or someone let him out." "Thank you for telling me," Claire said quietly. "It helps more than you know." Martha gave a small nod. "You're doing a good thing, Claire. He may not wag his tail or lick your hand, but that dog knows you saved him." She turned to leave her cane tapping gently on the floor, then paused at the door. "Funny thing about pain," she said over her shoulder. "It doesn't always make noise, but when it lifts even just a little, you'll feel it in the quiet." Claire stood for a moment in silence after Martha left, then returned to the exam room. Zephyr was awake, head raised slightly. She sat down beside him again, this time with nothing in her hands, just herself. "I think I know where you came from," she said. Zephyr blinked slowly. "I don't know how long they kept you in that cage or why they thought you didn't matter. But I want you to know something." She leaned in closer. "You're not a cage dog anymore." And for the first time, Zephyr shifted his weight, nudging his head gently against her thigh. It was so subtle she might have imagined it, but she didn't. The storm hit just after sunset. At first, it was only a scattering of snowflakes drifting lazily across the sky, but by nightfall the wind had grown teeth. Snow fell thick and fast, whirling in circles outside the windows of the clinic like ghosts searching for a door. The temperature dropped sharply, and before long the lights flickered twice and went out with a low, mechanical groan. Claire Bennett moved quickly, grabbing the lantern from under the reception desk and lighting the old wood-burning stove in the corner of the main room. The smell of cedar and smoke soon replaced the sterile scent of antiseptic. She was calm but efficient. Years of dealing with animal emergencies had trained her to work through chaos. Zephyr was curled in his usual corner, but the cold made his joints stiffen, and she noticed him trembling slightly under the blanket. She moved his bed closer to the stove, layering a second comforter on top. As she adjusted the fabric, her fingers brushed against something hard beneath his thick, knotted fur. Curious, she carefully worked her hand under the matted patch near his neck. Her fingers closed around a small round tag, cold metal, worn smooth with time. She gently pulled it free. It was a dull brass disc, no larger than a quarter, attached to a broken loop of leather. The letters stamped into the metal were faded, but still visible. BR-23. Claire's brows drew together. This wasn't a regular ID tag. It looked military or official, something institutional. She tucked it into her pocket, her thoughts already spinning. Just then the front door creaked open, letting in a blast of freezing air and a flurry of snowflakes. Eli stepped inside, clutching a canvas backpack and blinking against the wind. I brought extra candles he called brushing snow from his hoodie. Grandma said it's going to be a long night. Claire offered a soft smile. You didn't have to come out in this. Eli shrugged. Didn't want Zephyr to get scared alone. She didn't argue. He had a way of stating things that left little room for negotiation. As night settled in, the three of them, Claire, Eli, and Zephyr, huddled in the clinic's main room. Candles flickered on the counters and shelves, casting long shadows. The stove crackled steadily, its warmth reaching the furthest corners of the room. Claire handed Eli a mug of warm water with honey, the best she could manage without power. They talked quietly about Eli's school, how Claire's father used to cook pancakes on snowy mornings, about Rocket Eli's old dog. Zephyr remained mostly still, eyes half-closed, ears occasionally flicking at the sound of their voices. The shadows moved gently across his fur, and the firelight painted his face in golden red. Later, when the wind howled loud enough to rattle the windows, Claire spread out thick sleeping bags on the floor. "We'll stay here tonight," she said. "The roads are ice and it's not safe to head back." Eli nodded and lay down beside Zephyr's bed, pulling the blanket over his shoulders. Claire sat with her back against the counter, eyes scanning the flickering flames. There was a peacefulness to the moment that she hadn't felt in months. And then it happened. Without sound or warning, Zephyr lifted his head and slowly turned toward Eli. The boy had his eyes closed, his breathing slow. Zephyr studied him for a long moment, then inched forward, his movement slow and deliberate, hindered by years of stiff joints and a lifetime of hesitation. He laid his head gently across Eli's leg. Claire didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched as something small and beautiful unfolded in the quiet warmth of the storm. Eli stirred, not waking, but unconsciously resting a hand on Zephyr's head. A bridge had been built, one made not of words, but of trust and shared pain. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out the tag again. BR-23. What had Zephyr been, a canine, a guard dog? Or perhaps something else? Something harder to explain and easier to forget. The tag was cold in her hand, but the fire was warm, and in that moment she decided it didn't matter. Whatever his past had been, Zephyr's present was here. With them. Outside, the storm continued to roar, but inside the clinic there was only the soft hiss of burning wood, the steady rhythm of breathing, and the deep healing silence of animals learning how to trust again. The snow had softened by the end of the week, leaving slush and puddles where once drifts had piled. Willow Creek awoke beneath a fragile sun that filtered through thinning clouds, and a sense of quiet renewal touched the town like breath on a mirror. At the clinic, Zephyr was beginning to move more each day. He still limped, still tired easily, but there was clarity in his eyes now, an awareness that hadn't been there when Claire first brought him in. He followed her sometimes from room to room, not close enough to crowd, but close enough to say, "I see you. I trust this place." Claire sat in her office that morning, her laptop open and the brass tag BR-23 resting beside her cup of coffee. She had been researching quietly for the past few days, digging through old online databases, forums, even archived files from nearby counties. The tag's design matched those issued by canine training programs used for municipal and private security contracts in the state of Montana. Specifically, one facility that had since closed down, Blue Ridge Canine Tactical, shuttered 5 years ago, due to mismanagement and multiple animal welfare violations. Her chest tightened as she scrolled through the reports. Photos of dogs in overused kennels, anonymous whistleblower statements, complaints from adopters who had taken in dogs too broken to rehome. And there, buried in a scanned intake roster from 2018, was the listing BR23, male GSD, 6 years dark coat, failed tracking evals assigned confinement protocol. Claire leaned back in her chair. So that's what he was. A dog trained for obedience, maybe even defense, but deemed unfit and discarded, tossed aside, not for aggression, but for not living up to someone's standards. Later that day, she took Zephyr for a short walk behind the clinic. The snow had mostly melted, revealing a patchy field dotted with frost-bitten grass. Zephyr moved slowly, but with more confidence than she'd seen before. As he paused to sniff an old fence post, Claire watched him not as a vet, but as someone witnessing a soul inching back into the world. That evening, Claire drove to Willow Pines Elder Care, the same facility where Martha Ellis lived. She had called ahead to speak with the director, and they had arranged a quiet trial visit to see how Zephyr would react in a public setting. The common room was warm, filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the scent of chamomile tea. A fireplace flickered at one end and a record player hummed something from the 1940s in the background. Zephyr sat at Claire's side, alert but calm. A few residents looked over curiosity, replacing their usual detachment. One man, seated in a high-backed chair near the window, caught Zephyr's attention. He was thin and wiry, with sharp blue eyes and a wrinkled face that spoke of long silences. His name was Walter Finch, a retired train engineer who'd lived at the facility for 3 years. Claire had been told he rarely spoke and spent most days by that window watching the trains that no longer passed. Without prompting, Zephyr approached Walter. The old man blinked, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as the German shepherd sat down beside his chair and rested his head gently on the man's foot. Walter didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he reached down with one hand and placed it atop Zephyr's head. The room fell still. Claire watched as 3 hours passed. Walter never got up. Zephyr never left his side. That night, Claire jotted the moment into her notes, writing only one line. Still knows how to guard. Just needs someone worth guarding. Back at the clinic the next day, Eli arrived carrying a crumpled flyer he had drawn by hand. I had an idea, he said, placing it on the counter with pride. It was titled Zephyr's Story Circle, drawn in colored pencil. There was a cartoon version of Zephyr in the center, surrounded by stick-figure kids holding books. We could do it on Saturdays, Eli explained. Kids could come read or just talk. Maybe they'll feel better if they're scared of dogs. And Zephyr could just be there. Claire blinked, moved beyond words. That's beautiful, Eli. He grinned. He helped me. Maybe he can help more. Claire posted the flyer on the community board at the diner that afternoon. She didn't expect much, but the next morning she found a folded note slipped under the clinic's front door. It read, "My daughter is very shy, but she loves animals. We'll be there this Saturday. Thank you for what you're doing. MJ." Claire smiled as she held the note, then looked toward Zephyr sleeping peacefully under the window. The world hadn't forgotten him. And somehow in helping him heal, they were making something new, something bigger than pain. Spring had arrived in Willow Creek with a cautious optimism. The snow was gone, replaced by damp earth and early green shoots poking through patches of frost-bitten grass. The air still held a chill, but the sun stayed longer each day, warming sidewalks and drawing children outdoors. The clinic had started to hum with a gentle rhythm. Regular checkups, a litter of kittens from a barn cat rescue, and even a new receptionist named Jenny, a cheerful young woman with cropped red hair and a can-do attitude that reminded Claire of herself before grief had carved quiet spaces in her voice. Zephyr spent most of his days in the sunlit corner near the front window, stretched out on a thick mat. Though still lean, his eyes had regained the calm sharpness of a dog who knew his place. Not in the world, necessarily, but in someone's world. And that was enough. That Friday, Claire stood beside Eli outside Willow Creek Elementary, helping set up folding chairs for the school's annual Community Day. The event was small but meaningful. Students got to showcase hobbies, meet local professionals, and hear stories from townspeople. Claire had been invited to speak about animal care, and Eli had insisted Zephyr come along. "We don't have to make him do anything," Eli had said, petting the old dog's ears gently. "He can just sit." "That's enough," Claire agreed, though part of her had been hesitant. Crowds could overwhelm dogs, especially ones with difficult pasts. But Zephyr these days seemed to carry himself with a steadier heart. By mid-morning, families began arriving. Tables were arranged around the schoolyard, displays of crafts and science projects fluttering in the breeze. Zephyr lay beside Claire's feet, head resting on his paws, ignoring the noise but aware of everything. His tail flicked now and then at Eli's voice, who sat a few feet away on a bench with other students. Then, near the story corner, just beyond the balloon arch, a sharp cry pierced the air. A boy no older than 8 had collapsed onto the grass, clutching his head with both hands. His body trembled violently. His name was Liam, and Claire recognized him from a wellness checkup earlier that year. His teacher, a kind woman named Ms. Patterson, with wire-rimmed glasses and a nervous gait, rushed to his side but froze, unsure how to help. I think it's his anxiety," she said helplessly. "He's had episodes since the car accident, his father's. He sometimes panics in crowds." Before Claire could move, Zephyr stirred. Slowly, with purpose, the old dog rose to his feet. He limped away from Claire's side, weaving through folding chairs and distracted children. He moved straight toward Liam. The yard quieted as people turned to watch. Zephyr lowered himself carefully beside the boy, his body curved just slightly to shield Liam from the crowd. He didn't nudge or lick or bark. He simply lay down silent and still, his presence anchoring the boy's panic. Liam's breathing slowed. One hand crept out and landed on Zephyr's back. Moments passed like whole hours. When Liam's mother, a short, auburn-haired woman named April, finally reached him, her face streaked with tears, she knelt beside Zephyr and placed a hand over his heart. "He saved him," she whispered. Claire felt something shift inside her. Zephyr hadn't been trained for this, or maybe he had, but whatever instincts had once been dulled by pain were awake again, alive, relevant. The rest of the day passed in a gentle blur. Zephyr returned to his mat content and was later given a ribbon of honorary community hero by the principal, a gesture simple but heartfelt. As the crowd thinned and Claire packed up the last crate, a man approached her near the fence. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal wool coat. His name was Tom Grady, a local architect whose daughter went to school with Eli. His salt-and-pepper hair was neatly combed and his tone was direct, though not unkind. "That dog," he said, nodding toward Zephyr, "has something special. I saw what happened with Liam." Claire nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "I've been considering a community grant," Tom continued, "for something meaningful. And I think you've found it." Claire blinked. "Found what?" "Connection," he said simply. "Healing without words. That's rare." He reached into his coat and handed her a card. "Call me. I'd like to fund part of a therapy wing for your clinic, if you're willing to grow this into something more." Claire looked down at the card, speechless for a long beat. Then she smiled, the kind that came from deep inside. "I think he'd like that," she said, glancing at Zephyr. Zephyr was lying on the edge of the field now, Eli beside him, both facing the late afternoon sun like it was something sacred. Claire tucked the card into her coat. She wasn't sure what came next. But she knew this, even in his twilight, Zephyr was still needed. Maybe not to guard a warehouse or patrol a fence. but to remind people young and old, broken and brave, that presence, even silent presence, could be enough to change a life. The afternoon sun slanted low across Willow Creek, casting warm streaks of amber through the windows of the clinic. Spring had finally shaken off its hesitance. Birds fluttered at the edge of the woods, and the breeze carried the scent of pine earth and old lilac from the bushes Claire's father had planted years ago behind the fence. Zephyr was stretched out on the porch of the clinic, eyes half closed, soaking in the golden light. His breathing was slower these days, softer, but his presence was still solid, like a stone warmed in the sun. Eli sat beside him on the wooden steps, a dog-eared library book open in his lap, reading softly. His voice wasn't meant for anyone in particular, just the wind, the pages, and maybe Zephyr, who listened without looking. Claire stood just inside, arms crossed, watching them through the screen door when a voice called from the gravel path. "Excuse me, is this the Bennett Clinic?" Claire stepped outside and squinted toward the source. A man in his late 50s approached, tall and slightly stooped from years of carrying weight, physical or otherwise. He wore a canvas jacket and faded jeans with a Nikon camera slung around his neck. His salt and pepper beard framed a mouth set in a natural, quiet frown. "That's right," Claire said, stepping forward. "You must be Mr. Rainey." "Ben Rainey," he nodded. "From Montana Hearts Weekly. I spoke with Mr. Grady about your therapy work. He suggested I visit before the article goes to print." Claire smiled. "Of course. Thank you for coming." Ben's handshake was firm but not overbearing. There was a certain stillness to him, a practiced observation in the way he moved his eyes, cataloging details without judgment. As they walked toward the porch, his gaze lingered on Zephyr and Eli. "That him?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Zephyr. And Eli, he's the heart behind all of this." Ben didn't speak for a moment. Instead, he lifted his camera slowly and took a single photo. Click. Zephyr didn't stir. Eli looked up briefly, offered a shy wave, then returned to his book. Ben cleared his throat. "Sorry. That light. That boy. That dog. That's the kind of photo that doesn't just tell a story, it finishes one." They settled into chairs near the porch rail, and Claire told him everything. Not the bullet point version, but the whole story, from the first night she found Zephyr in the rain, to the slow uncoiling of trust, the discovery of his canine past, and the moment he lay down beside Liam. Ben listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, but mostly letting her words settle. When she finished, he removed his cap, revealing a scar above his temple, a thin line cutting diagonally into his hairline. "I had a dog like him once," he said finally. "His name was Diesel. Served 2 tours with a handler overseas before he was retired, and like so many of them, dumped when the usefulness ran out." Claire's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. "I picked him up at a county shelter outside Billings." Ben continued, voice cracking. "Didn't speak for the first 3 days. Just lay in the corner like he was waiting for an order that would never come. But he came around. Slowly. He used to sleep under my desk when I wrote." His eyes shimmered. "Died 6 years ago. Haven't photographed a shepherd since." He looked toward Zephyr again, then raised the camera. "May I?" Claire nodded, and Ben moved closer, kneeling into the grass, careful not to spook the dog. But Zephyr didn't move. He lifted his head slightly, as if to acknowledge the man, then laid it back on Eli's thigh. Click. Ben captured the moment, the sun spilling over them. Eli's hand resting on Zephyr's back, the dog's eyes closed in perfect peace. Afterward, he lowered the camera and sat still for a long time. Then he wiped at his cheek with the back of his hand. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't think it would hit me like that." "You're not the first," Claire said softly. "And you won't be the last." Later that evening, after Ben left and Eli had gone home, Claire returned inside and found an envelope waiting on her desk. No postmark, just a manila folder with her name scrawled on the front in careful block letters. Inside was a copy of Zephyr's original intake file. Not the fragments she had found online, but the complete record photograph, training details, unit codes. And at the bottom, in bold letters, BR, 23. Status retired. Handler deceased. Final note. Loyal to the end. Never broke command. Never betrayed. Claire didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she quietly slid the document into a frame and hung it on the clinic wall beside the photo Ben had printed and dropped off just before leaving town. Zephyr eyes closed under the afternoon sun, Eli's hand on his back. A moment of stillness, trust, and completion. She looked at the frame and whispered, "You didn't fail, boy. They failed you. But not anymore." The light outside began to dim, but the room somehow had never felt warmer. The morning light was soft pale gold, spreading gently across the hills of Willow Creek, touching rooftops and the glass panes of shop fronts as if reluctant to disturb the peace. The town woke slowly. Birds stirred in the branches. A breeze danced through the pine trees. And in the corner of the porch at the Bennett Clinic, Zephyr lay still. Claire stepped outside with a mug of coffee still wrapped in her robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. The air was cool but kind. She glanced toward the mat where Zephyr usually stretched, expecting the slow lift of his head, the brief twitch of his ears in greeting. But there was no movement. She didn't rush. She didn't call out. She simply walked to him, knelt, and placed her hand gently on his chest. No breath. No sound. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edge of the porch banner. Zephyr's Story Circle, Saturdays at 10. Claire closed her eyes and exhaled. She didn't cry right away. Grief didn't come in a flood this time. It arrived in small, sacred ripples, the quiet absence of his weight beside her, the hollow spot in the routine, the way the light hit the porch, without the soft golden fur to reflect it. Later that morning, Eli arrived with his backpack and a new notebook under his arm. His steps slowed as he approached the porch. When he saw Claire sitting beside Zephyr, her hand resting gently on his back, he stopped. Claire looked up. "He's gone, sweetheart." Eli didn't speak. He only nodded, lips pressed tightly together, and sat down beside her. They stayed there for a long time. The three of them, too, living one remembered. The funeral was small. Just Claire, Eli, Martha Ellis from the care facility, Jenny, the new receptionist, and a few of the children who came every Saturday to sit and read beside Zephyr. They buried him under the lilac tree in the backyard, the same one Claire's father had planted decades ago. The blossoms were just beginning to bud soft purple against the warming air. Claire had a small wooden plaque made Zephyr the dog who stayed, loyal to the end, loved always. Weeks passed. The seasons tipped forward. The photo Ben Rainey had taken hung in the waiting room, now framed in dark walnut alongside a brass plaque engraved with Zephyr's name and service code. But the real tribute came not in still images, but in motion, in the everyday stories that unfolded inside the clinic. Claire changed the name above the door. The Zephyr Center, not just a veterinary clinic, but a sanctuary, a place for old dogs, hard stories, and quiet healing. She began partnering with the town's shelter, offering permanent foster homes for aging dogs no one else wanted. Dogs with missing teeth, cloudy eyes, stiff legs. Dogs like Zephyr. Eli helped every Saturday, brushing coats, warming meals, and writing short biographies to post on the clinic bulletin board. And he wrote something more. His teacher, Ms. Patterson, a warm woman in her early 30s, with a soft voice and a fierce belief in creative expression, had encouraged him to submit a story to the state's annual student essay contest. Eli wrote about Zephyr. The essay, titled "The Dog Who Stayed," was raw and honest. He described the first day he brought the blanket to the clinic, how Zephyr didn't look at him, how weeks later he woke up during a storm with Zephyr's head on his leg, how that small act made him believe he could be someone worth staying with. He ended the essay with one simple line: he didn't bark or fetch or chase. He just stayed. And that saved me. The essay was selected for statewide publication. His teacher read it aloud in class, pausing more than once to wipe her eyes. When the news reached Claire, she printed a copy and placed it in the front window next to the flyer for the next story circle. People still asked about Zephyr, travelers passing through town, clients returning after long absences, children who had once sat nervously in the corner but now brought in their own dogs for checkups. And every time someone asked where the name came from, Claire would smile and say, "From a dog who never gave up on people." The wind in Willow Creek never really stopped. Sometimes it howled, sometimes it whispered, and sometimes on bright spring mornings it moved across the porch of the Zephyr Center like a memory soft and strong and impossible to forget. And somewhere in that wind, if you listened closely, you could almost hear a slow tail thump. Still watching, still guarding, still staying. Sometimes God sends angels in fur, not to speak, not to perform miracles with thunder and light, but to stay. To sit with us in silence, to remind us that love doesn't need words, and that healing often comes in the shape of an old dog who simply refuses to give up. Zephyr didn't just find a home, he gave one. And through his quiet loyalty, we're reminded that even the forgotten have purpose, and even the broken can still be chosen. Maybe that is the miracle. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever been saved by an animal's love? And if you believe that God still works through small, gentle lives, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe to join our journey, and may the Lord bless you and every creature you've ever loved.